Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Dylan Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and I've been an air traffic controller for over a decade. I worked the tower at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world. Fast-paced, high-stress, relentless. Those were the constants. I used to think I'd seen it all. Emergency landings, mid-air diversions, even a lightning strike once. But nothing prepared me for what happened 3 weeks ago. Nothing. The outbreak didn't start with sirens or emergency broadcasts. It started with a whisper. A note in an overnight NOTAM update from a regional tower in Kentucky. Something about crew disorientation and violent passenger behavior forcing a return to the gate. We saw the report in the morning briefing, joked about it over stale coffee, and chalked it up to too much alcohol or a psychotic break. None of us gave it weight. That was the first mistake. Monday, 7:02 a.m. week 1. I walked into the tower with my thermos and my headset slung around my neck. Atlanta's tower is a massive steel needle, 398 feet tall, glassed in at the top with a 360-degree view of every runway, taxiway, and gate. It felt like being at the center of the country's circulatory system, directing planes instead of blood cells. "Mercer, you're on arrivals," said Jalen, my shift lead. He looked more stressed than usual, bags under his eyes. "Everything good?" I asked, sliding into the console beside him. "Yeah, just weird overnight reports. Couple of flights diverted. CDC called in to meet an international flight from Sao Paulo. Something about a sickness on board." I raised an eyebrow. "Sickness? Like food poisoning?" He shrugged. "They didn't say. Security's tight around that terminal, though. G4S officers and even a couple of guys in hazmat suits. Never seen that before." Something inside me stirred. I keyed up the arrivals board. A Delta 777 from Sao Paulo was taxiing to gate F5. No comms issues, no technical anomalies, but it was running late, almost 90 minutes behind schedule. As the morning rush built, we didn't have time to speculate. Planes lined up like beads on a string. ATL handles over 2,500 flights a day. That morning was no different until about 10:19 a.m. "Delta 2439, you're cleared for takeoff runway 27. "Right," I said. There was a pause. Then static. "Delta 2439, come in. You're cleared for takeoff runway 27, right." A voice crackled back, but not the one I expected. "This is First Officer Miles. Captain Benson he's incapacitated. We have a situation in the cockpit." I sat up straight. "Miles, confirm. Is this a medical emergency?" There was another pause. "No. He attacked a flight attendant. Something's wrong with him. He's not responding. He bit her." My fingers tightened on the console edge. That word, bit. I turned to Jalen. He was already on another headset, coordinating with emergency response. "Hold position, 2439, I said, my voice level. "Stay on comms." We watched the aircraft sit idle on the taxiway for several minutes. Emergency crews were dispatched. Then the unthinkable happened. The plane started moving, without clearance. It turned sharply off the taxi line and rolled toward a service area. It took us 30 seconds to realize the cockpit was dark. Then it slammed into a catering truck. The investigation that followed was brief, too brief. The story the press ran was that the captain suffered a mental breakdown. But we heard things. Things from the ground crews who went in after him. About how he didn't respond to pain. about how he lunged at paramedics, about the flight attendant who later had to be sedated and locked in quarantine. Tuesday, 3:41 p.m. News began to spread. Slowly at first. Local channels reported strange illnesses at airports in Miami, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But we were too busy coordinating reroutes and managing delays to notice the common thread. It wasn't until late afternoon that I overheard a conversation between two TSA officers that made my blood run cold. "Biting again," one of them said. "And they don't go down unless they're, really put down, like hard." I stepped outside the tower for a smoke, something I hadn't done in over a year. The air was heavy with jet fuel and humidity. A fuel truck roared past me. On the far side of the tarmac, I could see a cluster of CDC vans parked near Terminal E. That night, I got a call from my sister Haley. She's a nurse at Northside Hospital. "Dylan, they locked down 2 wings," she whispered, panic in her voice. "There's this guy. He came in with a high fever, violent behavior, then he just stopped breathing. We tried CPR and then..." He stood back up. His eyes were all wrong. He attacked an intern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. I locked myself in the supply room. I don't know what's going on. They're saying it's some kind of brain infection, but it's spreading like nothing we've ever seen." I told her to get out. I told her to go home, lock her doors, and keep the news off. But the next morning, she wasn't answering her phone. Wednesday, day 3. Flights were grounding. Not in Atlanta, not yet, but internationally. Heathrow went quiet. Flights from Asia were being rerouted mid-air. The FAA issued a temporary domestic flight restriction for all commercial aircraft entering U.S. airspace, due to elevated biosecurity concerns. By midday, military personnel started appearing at airports across the country. In Atlanta, we saw National Guard units roll into the airport perimeter by 4 p.m. Apache helicopters circled overhead. That evening, the terminal monitors started flickering with cancellations, one after another. Jalen and I were called into a private briefing room. An FAA liaison, a woman named Regina Mott, was waiting for us with 3 CDC officials. They explained that there had been an outbreak of a previously unknown viral strain, that it was highly contagious, that it altered brain function and induced extreme aggression, that it suppressed pain receptors and massively increased host durability. They didn't use the word undead, not once, but I could see it in their eyes. They were trying to contain something that had already slipped through the cracks. "Effective immediately," Regina said. "Hartsfield-Jackson is being converted into a Tier 2 quarantine hub. Your job is to redirect all international arrivals to military-controlled runways. No passengers are to disembark unless cleared by CDC teams. Any aircraft that deviates from procedures to be treated as hostile." I asked what that meant. She looked me dead in the eye. "It means we'll scramble F-22S from Dobbins Air Reserve Base if necessary." Friday, day 5. The airport became a fortress. Armed guards lined every corridor. Mobile biotents were erected on the tarmac, and yet more flights arrived than we could handle. People desperate to flee areas already overwhelmed. One flight, a private Gulfstream from Mexico City, refused to land on the designated runway. When ATC ordered a divert, they didn't comply. We lost contact. Minutes later, the aircraft crashed near the freight terminal. We sent emergency responders. One didn't return. By the end of that night, no more inbound flights were permitted without military escort. Terminal A was fully closed. Terminal B was a triage zone. And still, there was no official statement to the public, just murmurs, speculation, confusion. Saturday, day 6. I found out Haley didn't make it. A friend of hers, Erica, another nurse, called from a burner phone. She told me Haley tried to help a patient who had seized violently during transport. He attacked her, bit her hand. Security tried to intervene, but Haley was already bleeding. They quarantined her. Erica said she didn't scream. She just cried. She told me to tell you she loved you, Erica said, and not to come looking for her, not to go to the hospital. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat in the stairwell of the tower, staring out the narrow window as a military C-130 taxied across runway 9 left. Sunday day, 7, 1 week in. The sky was empty. No flights on radar, no takeoffs, no landings. Nothing but static on most frequencies. We were alone in the tower, a skeleton crew, Jalen, me, 2 other controllers, Tamara and Luis. The terminals were ghost towns now. The city was under a soft lockdown, but it wouldn't stay soft for long. Roads were already barricaded by National Guard units. Check-in counters were manned not by airline staff, but by uniformed soldiers and CDC teams in biohazard suits. All scheduled commercial traffic had stopped. Military and government aircraft were the only things moving, and even they were becoming scarce. We took shifts monitoring radar and radio traffic, but there was barely anything to watch. Our radar screens, once crowded with IFF codes and transponder returns, were now black with only a few scattered signals, mostly emergency or medical helicopters. Occasionally, a C-130 from Dobbins or Fort Benning would ping the airspace, but most of them just flew straight through without talking to us. Jalen made jokes to fill the silence, but they landed flat. He was trying to keep morale up, but it was fraying fast. The food situation was manageable at first. The operations break room had vending machines and stocked emergency kits, and Jalen had smartly brought up supplies from the staff kitchen on day 4. We rationed out water and nutrition bars, using the kitchenette sparingly. No one wanted to use the elevator more than necessary. The idea of getting trapped in it while the power failed, or worse, while someone infected found their way inside, wasn't worth the risk. On day 9, we lost power for the first time. The outage was brief, 15 seconds, maybe 20, but it was long enough to send a spike of dread through all of us. The backup generator kicked in immediately, humming to life beneath the tower's base, but we all knew it had a limit. We didn't know how much fuel it had. Maintenance hadn't been up in days. The last text anyone received from the facility manager said he was checking on something at Concourse D, and that was it. By day 10, we faced a new issue: the smell. The airport's HVAC system was still operational, but the air it cycled through was starting to bring with it the unmistakable stench of rot. It wasn't in the tower yet, not directly, but you could smell it faintly in the ventilation. Tamara started spraying disinfectant every hour just to cover the smell. The rest of us stopped saying anything. We didn't need to. We knew what it meant. Somewhere in this airport, maybe several places, something had died. Or, more accurately, stopped staying dead. We decided to seal the stairwell access to the tower floor on day 11. Jalen used zip ties and fire hose cable from the emergency box, lashing the door handles shut and wedging a metal baton through the lower frame. We weren't trained for that sort of thing, but we adapted. Everyone did. Survival rewrites your list of priorities fast. That night, we took turns on watch. The others tried to sleep. I sat in the control chair, headset off, eyes scanning the monitors. I heard something around 2 a.m., a dull metallic clang, distant somewhere down in the terminal. Then another, closer. It wasn't wind, it wasn't a drop tool, it was deliberate. I stood and turned off the console speakers, holding my breath as I moved toward the window. The tower's visibility was good. Panoramic glass offered a perfect view of the runways and concourses below. That's when I saw them. They weren't running or swarming or screaming like in the movies. They were just wandering. Half a dozen figures moving between grounded aircraft on the tarmac, swaying like drunk passengers after a long-haul flight. One of them stumbled into a service cart, collided with the metal frame, then kept walking. No reaction. No sign of pain or awareness. Jalen joined me seconds later, silently taking in the view. "They're not supposed to be out there," he muttered. "No, they're not," I said. Luis checked the interior cameras. One showed something worse. 2 infected inside the terminal, near security checkpoint C. One of them had what looked like part of a uniform still on, possibly a TSA officer. The other had no clothes on its upper half. Both of them moved slowly but deliberately, dragging their feet through the corridor as if they knew exactly where they were going. "They got in," Tamara said behind me. Her voice was thin, brittle. "They're inside now." We spent the rest of that night triple-checking every entry point to the tower. The stairwell was already secure. The elevator was locked down via the panel in the maintenance closet. Jalen disabled the key override. By morning, I was convinced we had to leave. Not because the infected were closing in, not yet, but because something worse was happening. Stagnation. The systems around us were decaying. Lights were flickering more often. Water pressure dipped twice in the sinks. The control network was no longer showing up-to-date information, and we stopped receiving NOTAM updates entirely. "We can't stay here much longer," I said during the morning meal, unwrapping a crushed protein bar. "Once the generator fails, we lose everything. Lights, water, elevator, cameras. We'll be blind, deaf, and trapped." Luis shook his head. "And go where? Atlanta's overrun. The city center's probably already gone." "Not necessarily," Jalen countered. "Dobbins is only 20 miles northwest. If they're still operating, they'll have supply lines. Fuel, food, armed patrols." 20 miles through a city full of those things, Tamara said. "You want to walk it?" "I'm saying we need a plan, a route, a vehicle. We can't wait until they're at the base of the tower to think about escape." We agreed to start planning. Tamara, who had once worked logistics for Delta, helped map out the airport's underground service tunnels. There was a utility corridor that ran from Terminal C all the way to the North Cargo Facility, used mostly for catering and emergency services. It bypassed public zones and had gated security doors. If we could get down there, we'd have a straight shot to the vehicle depot. We found keys in a secured locker for a Delta fleet van. Electric, quiet, armored enough to push past debris. Jalen located a service pistol in the on-site security safe, a standard-issue Sig Sauer, P320. 1 magazine, 15 rounds. No more. It was something, but barely. On day 13, we made our move. Tamara stayed behind. She had twisted her ankle days prior while clearing debris near the access hatch and didn't want to slow us down. It was her choice. She said she'd hold the tower for as long as she could, run interference if needed. I knew she didn't expect to see us again. Jalen, Luis, and I descended into the dark, emergency lights guiding us down rust-colored steel stairs that echoed with every footfall. The air smelled like dust, disinfectant, and something else underneath. Something rancid. The service tunnel was wide enough to drive a cart through, with pipes running along the ceiling and maintenance panels lining both walls. We moved quickly, flashlights low, boots quiet. The further we went, the more signs of chaos we found. Blood smeared on a door frame, a half-crushed walkie-talkie underfoot, a clipboard lying in a puddle with the ink run dry. Near the halfway point, we encountered our first real threat. It came out of a side passage, silently at first, then with a sudden inhuman lurch. It was fast, far faster than I expected, and its eyes were wide and blank. It had the uniform of an airport janitor but no jaw, just a torn open maw where the lower half of its face had been. Luis raised a fire extinguisher and swung with all his strength. The blow knocked it sideways into the wall. Jalen leveled a SIG and fired once. Center mass. Nothing. The thing lunged forward. He fired again, this time striking it just above the left eye. It dropped instantly. We stared at the body for a long time before moving again. At the north exit, we found the cargo depot mostly intact. A few delivery trucks were burned out, some with shattered windshields. No visible bodies, but fresh signs of conflict. Drag marks, open containers, spent shell casings. We found the Delta van, miraculously undamaged, parked near a wall beneath a tarp. The keys worked. The battery held a 78% charge, enough for at least 50 miles. We didn't wait. Jalen drove. I navigated. Luis rode in the back, watching the side mirrors with the pistol in hand. We took the back perimeter road, bypassing the checkpoints. The terminal entrances were clogged with vehicles, abandoned, some wrecked, others simply left with doors open and hazard lights still blinking. As we passed the domestic terminal, I saw a woman standing motionless in the road, her eyes black as soot, arms hanging loosely by her sides. She didn't move as we passed. We hit I-285 just before sunset. The interstate was a graveyard, cars in every lane. Some burned, some flipped. We weaved between them, crawling at 10 miles per hour, the van's electric motor humming softly. Luis spotted movement twice, both times far off. At mile marker 52, we saw our first airstrike. It was off in the distance, toward the northwest. A pair of jets, possibly F-15S or Raptors, screaming low above the tree line. A second later, a distant thump. A plume of black smoke rose into the fading orange sky. They were still trying to contain something, or maybe they were just cleansing sectors now. By the time we reached the outer perimeter of Dobbins Air Reserve Base, it was already dark. And the gate was open. No guards, no lights, no sound. We parked 50 yards from the entrance and stepped out, cautiously approaching. The base wasn't silent. Not exactly. We could hear something faint, rhythmic, like metal striking metal. It echoed through the dark, hollow structures ahead, each clang followed by a pause, then another clang, like a pendulum striking the side of a bell. We moved slowly, hugging the edges of the road that led to the main security checkpoint. The guard booth was empty. The bulletproof glass cracked but not shattered. A trail of blood curved away from the entrance, smeared across the pavement in a pattern that suggested something, or someone, had crawled, not walked, from the gate toward the inner perimeter. Overhead, floodlights had stopped working, leaving the base bathed in moonlight and the orange shimmer of nearby brush fires. The rhythmic clanging continued somewhere in the distance, steady, hollow, maddening. Jalen scanned the scene with a flashlight but kept it low, just enough to pick out shapes. Luis gripped the SIG in both hands, his shoulders tense. I kept checking our 6, watching the access road behind us in case we weren't as alone as it seemed. We passed through the gate and followed the blood trail, which disappeared into a storm drain near a side building labeled HQ Field Command Post. The door was open, swaying gently in the breeze, the metal hinge squealing faintly with each movement. Inside, the field post was in chaos. Chairs overturned, maps pinned to the walls flapping in the draft, papers scattered across the floor like a windstorm had passed through. A whiteboard near the far end still had writing scrawled across it in thick red marker. Evacuation failed, Hold North End airfield lost. Below that, another line in a different hand, written in what looked like charcoal. Do not engage, they learn. Luis muttered something under his breath and knelt beside an overturned cot. A half-eaten MRE sat on the floor beside a stained uniform. Whoever had been here hadn't left in a hurry. They had tried to stay, tried, and failed. The rhythmic clanging was louder now. It sounded like it was coming from the far hangars, large, blocky structures at the north end of the base. We debated briefly whether to investigate, but in the end we had no choice. If there was anyone alive here, we had to find them. We needed fuel, food, and possibly protection, or, at the very least, answers. The walk to the hangars took nearly 10 minutes, not because of the distance, but because we moved at a crawl. Every shadow could have hidden something. Every flicker of movement sent a jolt through my chest. When we finally rounded the corner of the last barracks building and reached the outer edge of Hangar B, the source of the sound became clear. There was a man inside, chained by his wrists to a metal pipe above his head. His bare feet barely touched the ground, and each time he sagged, the chains would rattle and slam against the pipe. That was the sound we had been hearing. We approached cautiously, weapons ready. He didn't react. His head hung low, chin resting against his chest. The light from Jalen's flashlight caught his face, and we saw that half of it was gone, literally. One side was slack, torn down to the cheekbone. His eye on that side had ruptured, and the muscle along his neck pulsed faintly. He wasn't fully turned, not yet. Luis pointed the pistol at him, but I stopped him. He's not a threat like this. Not yet. Look at the chains. They didn't put him here to kill him. They were testing something. On a nearby table were notebooks, syringes, and open medical trays. The pages were soaked in blood, but some were still legible. Jalen picked one up and held it under the flashlight. Test 4. Subject retains partial cognitive function after 72 hours. Exposure to airborne variant confirmed. Immune response absent. Movement pattern suggests residual memory pathways remain active. Avoid eye contact. Subject mimics human speech but is not responding to stimulus. Secure for observation. Jalen dropped the page and stepped back. The man, if he could still be called that, let out a low wheezing sound. Not a moan, not a growl, something in between. Like a whisper filtered through torn vocal cords. His lips moved, just barely. I leaned closer. He was repeating something. Not alone, not alone, not alone. That's when we heard footsteps. Not shuffling, not dragging. Actual footsteps. Measured, alert, booted. More than one pair, coming from behind the hangar. We extinguished the flashlight instantly and dropped into the shadows. Luis and I pressed up behind a maintenance tractor, while Jalen slid behind a stack of metal crates. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped just outside the hangar. Someone stepped into the doorway, a silhouette holding a rifle. Room secure, a voice said. Not infected, human. Calm, military cadence. 2 more figures appeared behind the first. All of them were armed, moving with precision and quiet coordination. I recognized their patches before they entered fully. USAMRID, the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Biohazard specialists. The kind that only showed up when things went so far south that standard units weren't enough. The lead soldier stepped into the hangar and flicked on a portable light mounted to his vest. It landed directly on the chained man. Well, he muttered, he's still breathing. One of the others approached the medical table. Samples still here, unsecured. Someone's been in here. His voice rose slightly. Eyes up, we're not alone. I tried to signal the others to stay quiet. We could not afford to be mistaken for hostiles. These weren't rescue troops. They were containment. And containment teams shoot first when they find breaches. Before I could decide whether to call out or retreat, Jalen moved. Quietly, but not quietly enough. His foot nudged a wrench left under the crate. It clinked, rolled once, then settled. The soldiers turned instantly, rifles raised. Hands where I can see them, the lead one barked. Jalen stepped out slowly, hands up. We're survivors. Air traffic control tower. We made it here yesterday. I stepped out next, then Luis. The tension in the room didn't drop, not even a little. You made it from the tower? The soldier asked. That place was supposed to be evacuated 12 days ago. No one came, I said. We held out. We saw the evacuation orders stop coming in. We had no choice. The soldier gestured to the chained man. You see this? He asked. This is why there are evacuation orders. The variant mutates. Some of them are still conscious, in a way, but they're not people anymore. Jalen glanced at the man again. He was talking. Repeating, the soldier corrected, not talking. You hear a voice in the woods long enough, you start thinking it's human, but it's just the forest echoing. That's what these things are, echoes. Dangerous ones. He turned back to his squad. Secure them. Run bioscans, full decon. Luis raised his voice, suddenly panicked. Wait, we're not infected. We've been isolated for weeks. We've had no contact. The soldier didn't hesitate. Standard procedure. We were led out of the hangar, rifles still trained on us. They marched us toward what used to be the officers' dorms, now repurposed into a field lab. Portable biotents, UV scanning gates, and containment pods lined the courtyard. They ran scans, took blood, swabbed mouths and ears. We sat under floodlights for over an hour, stripped of weapons, bags, everything. Eventually, a man in a white protective suit with the rank of colonel on his lapel approached. He introduced himself as Colonel Arlen Shaw, USAMRID Command. You're clear, he said, but your timing is terrible. Jalen leaned forward. Why? The colonel sighed. Because this base isn't holding. We've got breach events on the north end and compromised personnel we can't extract. Within 48 hours, we're pulling out and burning everything behind us. You're leaving? I asked. We're relocating, he said, to a secure location with higher ground and natural choke points, and with less civilian infrastructure to worry about. Jalen caught the implication. You mean fewer people? Shaw didn't respond. We were given the option, stay behind with 2 soldiers to monitor the site and delay the spread, or join the convoy leaving in the morning. No promises were made about where it was heading, only that it was safer. We chose to go. That night, they let us sleep inside the medical barracks. Clean beds, clean water, fluorescent lights that hummed but didn't flicker. It felt surreal, like we had stepped out of a nightmare and into the memory of the world we used to live in. The mattress was too soft, the pillow too clean, and I couldn't stop thinking about how unnatural the silence felt, how absence had become more jarring than chaos. For the first time in weeks, there were no distant screams, no shouts over radio chatter, no scratching at the door. But that silence held its own weight. It wasn't peace, it was anticipation. I lay awake longer than I wanted to, eyes fixed on the seams in the ceiling tiles, listening to Luis's slow rhythmic breathing on the cot beside me. Jalen had passed out fully clothed, curled on his side near the emergency exit. I tried to do the same, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. Something about the way Colonel Shaw had said, "This base isn't holding," clung to my thoughts. There was resignation in his voice, not panic, as if they already knew whatever was coming couldn't be stopped. It was sometime near dawn when I finally drifted off. I must have slept for maybe 40 minutes when I was pulled awake again. Not by light or footsteps, but by voices. Dozens of them. Soft, murmuring, overlapping. Not shouting, not aggressive. Just whispering, like a crowd muttering through a prayer. For a long moment I thought I was dreaming, but then I realized they were outside. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake the others. The windows were narrow, reinforced glass slits near the top of the wall. I climbed up onto the small metal cabinet beneath one and pressed my face to the glass. At first, I saw nothing, just the faint silver glow of moonlight reflecting off the vehicles in the motor pool. Then, in the dimness beyond the outer fence, I saw shapes. Still, upright, at least a dozen, maybe more. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching. And then I heard it again, soft, deliberate, synchronizing like a chant. Not alone, not alone, not alone. The phrase rose and fell with irregular cadence, like the rhythm of breath filtered through rotting vocal cords. And it wasn't just one voice, it was many, some distorted and broken, others eerily human. The effect wasn't terrifying in the usual sense. It was worse. It was intelligent. A siren blared somewhere deeper in the base, sudden and jarring. A voice followed through the intercom system. All personnel, code black. Perimeter breach at the north fence, code black. The lights in the barracks snapped to red, emergency mode, and the comm dissolved instantly. Jalen shot upright, and Luis was already pulling on his jacket and boots before I could speak. North fence, I told them. They're infected just standing out there, watching. Jalen looked dazed, barely processing, but he nodded and grabbed his bag. Did they breach yet? I didn't answer, because I didn't know. Because something about their behavior, so still, so synchronized, suggested that they hadn't come to charge the base. They had come to test it. We were out the door in under a minute, joining a flood of soldiers and medtechs sprinting toward the inner checkpoints. The field hospital staff were already loading gear into transports, white-suited technicians barking orders and dragging sealed crates full of biosamples to waiting trucks. No one panicked, no one screamed. It was all brutally efficient, because they'd prepared for this. They'd known. I caught sight of Colonel Shaw near the command tent, radio in one hand, sidearm drawn in the other. His jaw was clenched, his voice tight but controlled. Detachment Charlie, fall back to Gate 4, secondary path. Burn the rest, no stragglers. I forced my way toward him. Sir, what do we do? He looked at me, recognition flashing for a moment, but there was no time for pleasantries. Convoy departs in 5 minutes, South Access Road. Stick with Sergeant Ellis. You stay outside that perimeter, you get left behind, understood? Understood. Good. And if any of those things follow us, you shoot to kill, then shoot again. He turned and vanished into the command tent. I didn't see him again. We ran for the south side of the base, following a stream of evacuees toward a line of armored vehicles and trucks idling behind the vehicle depot. Jalen stayed at my shoulder, Luis close behind. We passed a group of engineers rigging explosives to the north side comms tower, and one of them gave us a small nod as we passed, like he already knew he wouldn't make it out. The whispers had stopped. I didn't know when, but the sudden absence of them was worse. It meant movement. Just as we reached the convoy staging point, the perimeter alarms changed pitch, switching from a repeating siren to a continuous high-pitched wail. That was the breach signal, the real one. One of the MRAP drivers shouted from the cab, "They're moving! North fence is down!" Chaos exploded behind us. Gunfire erupted from the northern sector, short and controlled bursts at first, but quickly devolving into panicked automatic fire. I turned once as I climbed into the rear of the transport and caught a glimpse of what was coming. They weren't running. They were marching. A wall of them. Hundreds. Moving with unnatural coordination. Arms at their sides, some still in uniform, others barely clothed, torn open but upright. Their eyes glowed faintly in the red emergency lights, and there was no rage in their faces. Just blank, focused intent. This wasn't a swarm. It was a formation. The convoy rolled out just as the outer gates detonated behind us, the sound of shrapnel and collapsing metal chasing us down the road. A dozen Humvees, 2 MRAPs, a medical transport, and a command SUV, fleeing south into the forested terrain toward the fallback point. I sat between Jalen and Luis in the back of the second MRAP, hands gripping the seat rail, heart hammering. The soldier across from us, Sergeant Ellis, I assumed, wasn't watching us. He was watching the onboard monitor linked to the rear drone. The image was grainy, but clear enough. They were pursuing us, but not with the erratic speed we'd come to expect. They were pacing us, keeping us in sight, like they wanted to follow, not catch. I leaned toward him. "Where are we headed?" He didn't look away from the screen. Old NORAD comms bunker, 40 clicks south up in the hills, reinforced, one way in, one way out. And after that? If we're lucky, air evac. If not, long wait. We rode in silence after that. The convoy took back roads, dirt switchbacks, and old logging trails that had probably been cleared days earlier in preparation for this exact scenario. Along the way, we passed the remains of civilian barricades, abandoned pickups with broken windshields, burned-out buses, signs that once said things like "safe zone ahead" and "God save us." Nothing was moving among the wrecks, nothing needed to be. The things behind us weren't scavengers. They didn't need anything. We reached the bunker just before noon. It looked like a concrete scar carved into the side of the mountain. Overgrown. Quiet. But the gates opened when the command vehicle pinged the perimeter, and we were ushered in without delay. A line of soldiers in full hazmat gear met us, scanning each of us again, before waving us down into the subterranean levels. Steel doors, blast corridors, narrow stairwells. This place wasn't just old, it was built to survive nuclear fire. Inside, we were assigned quarters. Converted old offices with cots, emergency rations, water filters. The medical team set up shop in the old command center. Armed guards were posted at every corridor junction. No one spoke unless they had to. I remember standing at one of the narrow security windows just before they sealed the outer doors for the night. The sun was dipping behind the trees. The convoy path was still visible in the dirt. And far, far down the hill, I saw them again, emerging from the tree line. Still in formation. Still watching. That was 12 days ago. We've been here ever since. Power is stable. Air filters are holding. There are 41 of us by last count, but morale is collapsing. 2 of the soldiers stopped speaking 3 days ago. Not because of trauma, because they're hearing the whispers again. We all are. Not constantly, but enough. And yesterday, we lost the drone signal from above. We sent a recon team to the upper levels this morning. They found scratch marks on the inside of the elevator shaft. Not outside. Inside. So, I'm writing this down now because I don't think we're safe anymore. I don't think we've been safe since that moment in the hangar, when we saw the chained man whispering the phrase they all seemed to know. Not alone. That wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. We've never been alone. Not up in the tower, not at the airfield, not in this bunker. They're here. And they're learning. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.